And what's the number one need of a woman in marriage?
To feel loved. I think one big thing is communication, and how you communicate with us, and just like I said, when you come through the door, you have to change hats, and I think that women tend to be more on the emotional side, and they want to connect with their husbands, emotionally, not just physically, but emotionally.
Hey, welcome to another episode of the Man Up podcast. I'm your host, Terry Gwaltney, and to say I'm excited today is an understatement. Our guest today, I've known through the years. She's become my best friend, my trusted advisor. The big reason why I have three amazing kids. And the day she said, I do, changed my life forever. So my wife, the queen of kindness, the princess of fashion, Kim Gwaltney, welcome to the Man Up podcast today.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here. I'm really kind of surprised that you would have me on here with an open mic.
It is risky, but I have Shane behind the mic to edit all the things that are incriminating, so I feel confident. So this is a trendsetter today because you're the first female guest we ever had on the show. I do know that we have females that listen. I don't know if that's just to give pointers to their husbands or to hold them accountable. I've heard that story too, but you are definitely the first female that we've had on the show. So, and this is cool. This is the first time we've done a podcast together. And for some of you maybe that have never visited Legacy Farm, we're doing this podcast today from Legacy Farm together, which I think makes that just extra special because this place lived in our hearts and our minds for almost 2 decades until we bought this property a couple years ago. And this journey here is just beginning to create a retreat center that will help men become better and help marriages grow stronger and for people to lead their companies and be a better parent, all the things in between. And so it's almost like this is setting the mark today.
Yeah, I think with that being said, too, like you said, this was in our hearts, Legacy Farm. This was in our hearts 20 years ago. So just as an encouragement today, never, I just want to remind people, never give up on your dreams. There's many times that, we could have given up and thought, well, I did, always thought, well, maybe this isn't going to happen. But 20 years later, here we are. So
yeah,
just let that be an encouragement today.
And I think, too, for so many years, we didn't know what this would look like, and what we thought it would look like changed. And, maybe as a source of encouragement too, for people that are listening, because that's so true. And I know for me, how God deals with me, I'm on a need to know basis, because the more I know, the faster I try to get there. And it seems like he gives me almost like breadcrumbs that he wants me to follow those. Otherwise I try to take a shortcut, or I try to get there faster than, what I should. And, I remember we thought for so long that, we'd build a lodge someday, and it would, we would focus on people that were, in ministry. It would be a place for them to disconnect and a place for them to get poured into because they poured out. And then we got our home, and, it was on 7 acres, and we thought, well, cramming that dream into that backyard and what that was going to look like. And it's amazing how God will use one little thing to kind of get you on that path. But, we're sitting here later, and I was on the phone earlier this morning talking to a real estate agent about property that I seen that was for sale down the road. And she laughed because I said, just keep in mind, if there's something comes available around here, we need more property. And we were, a few years ago trying to cram what we thought this would look like in a 7-acre plot. We're sitting on 110, and I'm already thinking we've outgrown this for where it's going to go. It's just interesting how.
Right, and I think it was
God
really
speaks to us.
interesting, when we went to visit a place similar to Legacy, how God showed us both that, wow, you're dreaming way too small. We started out with 7 acres, and now we have 110 acres here. And then, like you said, we've already outgrown that, wondering how we're going to cram all this in 110 acres. So sometimes our vision, we think a little too small.
I think, for anybody listening, if you've got a God-given dream, there's a couple things about that. One, it's definitely going to be bigger than you. And 2, you're not going to be able to do it on your own. And I think vision comes with that as God begins to give you pieces of that. So we're sitting here talking about, there's so many things we haven't even started, but because it's been built in our mind already, we're saying we've outgrew it. And it's not that we're maximizing the 110 acres that we have here. It's just like, well, we know this step, and this step, and where that goes, and like we don't have room for that. And so I think the things that God speaks in your mind, speaks to your heart, you're the architect of that in your mind, and that becomes the vision. And because the dream is so big, you can't do it alone. You have to have a clear picture of that, because you're the one that's, if he's impregnated you with that, so to speak, you're the one that has to carry that and be able to paint a picture to someone that's like, I see a field. What are you talking about? So anyway, that just makes all this extra special today. So I want the audience to get to know you a little bit. And really the reason that I asked him on the show today is I felt like as men, having a female perspective might just be helpful for us when we're actually trying to become a better husband or a better father, or, I think we tend to want to hang out with people that are like us and people that agree with us. And problem is many of us share the same challenges. And so to hear from the alien race that we call female, that seems so foreign to us sometimes, I thought would be beneficial. But before we get there, I want them to really get to know just a little about you, where you came from, and so on and so forth. And then we'll dive into those things. Hopefully that'll help the listeners today. So just jump off wherever you want to. Like, where'd you grow up? How did you meet your spouse? How long have you been married? All those great things.
Well, I grew up in southern Illinois in a little rural town. And believe it or not, one of my favorite things that we were talking about was I used to, like I said, we lived in a very rural area, was ride dirt bikes. That was one of my favorite things to do growing up. One of my childhood memories was riding dirt bikes. Also, my dad used to be in all the demolition derbies in our area back in the day when they still had fairs, and he was always in the demolition derby. So he would have a demo car that we would get together and help him fix up. But one thing that I remember was we used to have this big old field at our house, and one of my best friends would come over, and my dad would put us in that derby car and let us drive around in the field, put us on magazines because we were too short to reach the pedals. And so it was just a lot of fun. I have a lot of my favorite childhood memories. I have a lot of good ones. I could go on and on about all of those. I was in gymnastics. I love doing gymnastics. I have 2 granddaughters who is also in gymnastics. That was one of my favorite things that I loved to do growing up. So I guess I'll dive into where we met.
Yeah, also many years ago.
Okay. We met at a Christian school. I was in 6th grade. And I remember my first day of school walking in. I know this sounds weird to so many parents. I was in 6th grade. But seeing you standing in the corner, I had no idea what your name was. I knew nothing about you. And I just felt like, wow, that's going to be my husband one day, which is so ironic. I was in the 6th grade, there's a long story leading up to that, how it even got to the Christian school, actually, which I might share a little bit about that.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was
think
in
that's important.
5th grade, and I remember one day at the very end of my 5th grade year, we were on the playground, and all of a sudden something hit me, and I was like, I really don't want to come back here next year. I want to go to a Christian school. And unbeknownst to me, I didn't even know there was such a thing as Christian schools. That was just something that I had a desire to do. I didn't know why. So I went home and shared that with my parents. And so I think as parents, they didn't just say, no, we can't do that, we can't afford it, or, just shoot me down. But they really encouraged it. And like the next day, they were looking up Christian schools in our area, trying to find, a place for me to go. But
No, they were looking for places for you to go.
So they were looking, for places for me to go. We had a couple interviews, and we found one school. It was in Equality, Illinois, of all places, and my parents prayed about it. That's, where we felt like I was supposed to go to school. So on that first day of school, it was kind of ironic that I would even have the idea to go to a Christian school and had the desire to go to a Christian school. But then walk in, and I don't know, it was definitely a God thing. But, I think I've told you this before, it's like when I walked in and seen you, I can recall everything about that day, like what you were wearing, what I was wearing. It's like a whole thing. Like I can remember every detail about that day.
That, not to share our young age, but how many years ago was that? 40?
Yes, 40 years plus.
Yeah. Pretty cool. I think the other thing, that sticks out as you're sharing that story, knowing a little bit about that, is that your parents weren't necessarily in a financial place to be able to make that happen. And yet the place they also chose to send you to school was, I'm doing the math, probably 25 miles away. So no public
Yes.
transportation. So that kind of commitment meant we got to get up, navigate 25 or 30 miles every morning to drop my kids off at school, pay for them to go when my taxes are being used to pay for a public school, and then turn around and be back there again in order to be able to take them back home.
And there was just a series of events that happened too. Like, we ended up meeting people from the school that lived in our area. So we would carpool, which, saved everybody, on fuel. And at the time, because that was a big commitment, paying monthly for me to go to school. Just like you said, with the fuel. But my parents didn't say, no, we can't afford it. They made a way because I had that desire. So I very much appreciate that.
It's really cool. It seems like we're taking on a theme of just, how God sovereignly steps into our lives. And, I think many times it's hindsight obviously is 2020. But looking back, I think even spiritually, you can have some 2020 hindsight. It was the year before that school started. That was a home church for where I was going, which my parents weren't even believers till about a year before that. And that's the only church that I ever remember that they ever went to. And I wanted to go to that the first year it started, and I lived in an entirely different town. I wasn't driving as far, but you think back about, well, what if you had not heard or listened to what God was telling you? What if your parents hadn't embraced that? What if my parents wouldn't have paid for me to go? I was 13 at the time. Or actually, no, see, I'm younger than you, so.
Yeah, right.
Well, so I was a year older and got there a year earlier, but you just think about all those things. And so just like you were saying when you're talking to parents a while ago, your kids are not too young to hear from God, and you better be trying to hear from God because you're helping them navigate decisions that maybe seem like they're temporary, but they have a long-term impact. So,
But just one decision we make as a parent can affect our kids for a lifetime. Just like I said, if my parents hadn't have, and at the time they really, honestly, they couldn't afford it. So if they would have used that as an excuse, our lives could have been totally different.
yeah.
And I've talked to my dad about that a lot. Like, what if we hadn't sent you there, and we just kind of talk about those things, the what ifs. But again, I'm very thankful that they were in tune and listened to what, I wanted, and they prayed about it and knew that was the right thing for us.
Yeah, I think if you're listening today, one of the things that I try to tell guys all the time is, especially when it comes to your marriage, but we're talking about kids right here, don't look at these things like they're an expense. Yes, there's a cost to them, and they appear to be an expense if you're keeping a budget, but flip the mindset that this is an investment. And I know because of the impact that had on my life, we turn around and at different seasons in our own kids' life did the exact same thing when we didn't have the money, and then where we could have definitely spent that money somewhere else, and we seen it as an investment. There was a time that we had built, and I'm remembering that we had built a new house, the only time we got to do that in our life. And our tuition for our kids was more than our house payment. And so, but because we had been impacted by it, we seen it as an investment. And we'll talk about our kids here in a minute that obviously are grown adults, that we're very proud of. But I feel like all of that investment, because when you're doing that, I'm investing money and a commitment of time, but I've also enlisted a whole other group of people that I feel like share my values, that are investing in my kids for hours a day. And I think we've seen the payoff of that many, many times over.
Which I think, too, it wasn't for us. Well, I know for me, it was more of a conviction, too, that I wanted to send my kids, to a Christian school. So it was a big commitment, financially in every way, but it was definitely a conviction that I had.
Yeah. So how many kids you have? How many grandkids?
We have 3 kids. We have 2 boys, 1 girl. The girl is in the middle of the 2 boys. And we have 6 grandkids, all the way from ages 10 all the way down to 3. So we just have stair steps all the way down.
Yes, and our life is full. And, I think one thing that, our story is a little bit different. When I tell people when they look at us like, well, you're not old enough to have 6 grandkids. You're absolutely right. We are not.
We just kind of grew up together.
Yes, we got married as kids. We had kids when we were kids, and we kind of all grew up together. And but it really was the grace of God, in our life. And the other side of that is that some of the stuff we're talking about, I want you to do a takeaway from this. There was an investment because we felt a certain conviction about school, and that's not to say that, everybody's called to go to a Christian school, and some people are there for a season and then they need to go to a public school. And so, that's your strategy for your family. That just happened to be a conviction for different seasons in our life. But
Well, I think it's interesting. I'll interject something there. Like, we have 6 grandkids, and 2 of them are homeschooled, but the other ones all go to a Christian school.
yeah,
And, their parents is sending them to a Christian school, and, that's kind of their conviction as well.
yeah. So a generational impact. We're seeing that now through that represents 3 different generations.
But even when our kids were in a Christian school, it's like when they got older, we would set them down and ask them, do you have a desire to go to a public school? We just had conversations, about it, and none of them chose to go. They wanted to stay, where they were.
Our youngest ended up graduating.
Right,
from
but
a
that was
public
for
school.
maybe
Yeah.
a year or 2. But
Yeah.
the other ones, never had the desire to go.
And my point of bringing that up is as much as we need to think about our marriages that way. I think sometimes, especially as men, going to a marriage conference, going to a retreat, going to counseling, for most men, that's like, it's like having to take medicine or going to a doctor. And, but you can either go and you can have a surgery and hope you survive and get resuscitated, or you can go and have normal checkups and take the proper medication and try to stay ahead of, a health crisis. It's the same thing with a marriage crisis. And I hope today, as you're listening, that maybe something will spark some things into you to begin to look at investing in your marriage. At minimal, you ought to be doing date nights once a week. That should be the goal that you're trying to do. But when I'm talking about like going to a retreat, that's hosted by a church, go pay money, invest to go to a 2-day, 3-night retreat somewhere. Well, that's expensive. That's $700 or $800. Or how much is your marriage worth? Go back and calculate how much you spent on your pets last year. Go back and calculate how much you spent on your favorite hobby last year. We're talking about things that have a generational impact. And so it's not that we can't afford those things. It's that they've not made it to the top of the list to be a priority. But it's very interesting how they jump to the top of the list when I'm in danger of losing half of everything that I have because my world's blowing apart. So hopefully that's an encouragement today that you're listening in terms of, man, I wish I could do that, but I can't afford it. Well, you can. It just may be a shuffling of your priorities. Look at it as an investment, not just as an expense. So what's one thing now, we're going on, careful here, this will be 38 years.
In August, yes.
Yeah, in August. What's one thing in marriage that you could have been better prepared for since you got married when you was 8?
Well, I think there would be several things when you get married so young. You really just think, I'm in love. It's going to be, you view it through that. You're going to live on love the rest of your life. And quickly when you get married, you realize, that's not going to, that's not going to happen. So I think, I wish that we would have had more like premarital counseling. We would have talked about things like how we were going to raise our kids, finances, just all those different things that I really didn't think about because, like I said, I was just in love and couldn't wait to get married and be a wife and a mother. So I would have really, that could have really benefited us. I think just to share some things of who's going to handle the finances or, who's going to do the cooking. Because sometimes we get married and we have all these expectations because of the way we were raised. Our spouses are raised completely different than us. So we have different expectations. So I think the premarital counseling would have solved a lot of those expectations of, who's going to cook? Well, I thought you were going to cook. Well, I thought we were going to eat out all the time. Those kind of things. And
That would be a fun podcast because what she's talking about is our family origins. Those are the expectations, especially if you don't talk about it, that you bring into that marriage. And without saying it, you're comparing your spouse to your dad or your mom, good, bad, or indifferent, because that's relative to you. It seemed like that was normal. And I think we would also benefited, just like we can benefit today from having mentors and life coaches. And some of those you can pay for. Some of those you can pull that information from a book and maybe never meet the person, but there's such value in just looking at somebody's like, they may not have it all together in this area, but they really like each other. And they've been married for a long time. And so I want to hang out with them because I think I could glean something from that. And I think that could have saved us a ton of time and probably a heartache if we'd have done that a lot earlier.
yes.
But what's the most rewarding part for you of being a wife and a mother?
Well, I think as a mother, I'll start there first. I mean, I know it can be, I had 3 kids that, stair steps, and it can be very stressful. And some days it's like, how do I even get through this day? And you're just overwhelmed, especially if you work outside the home with, all the daily activities, all the daily things that have to be done. So I know it can be very stressful. But motherhood, I think, is one of the most rewarding. It's the greatest responsibility I think we'll ever have is raising our kids. But I think now that our kids are grown, I look back, and one of the most rewarding things is to see them following their dreams and stepping into the call and doing the thing that they were created to do. I think that is so rewarding now that they're older, and just watching them. And it seems like they're just so much further along than we were. Obviously, we got married so much younger, and they're so much wiser than we were in a lot of different areas. And so that's I think one of the most rewarding things for me is to see that in your kids. And
Yeah, I would agree. Actually, a daughter was asking me, we were on a trip somewhere together, and she was saying, like, what kind of regrets do you have? You said, I don't, it seems like you've always went for something, so it doesn't seem like, you would, I wish I would have tried this or done that. And I didn't have to think about it very long because I think about it often. And what I told her was, I regret that I didn't spend more time studying and preparing to be a better husband and a father. And, the excuse could be, and then looking back, is I was so busy doing life and trying to figure out how to pay for the last commitment that I made and just survive the rat race you're talking about, that I didn't spend the time that I could have. I was trying to survive parenthood. I was trying to, survive, in a marriage where I could have spent a whole bunch more time thriving. And I watch our kids, and actually all of them, but her having this conversation, I know that she read book after book after book and listens to podcast after podcast on, how to be a better parent and understanding my kid's personality. And I wish I would have done a much better job at that. I think maturity has something to do with that too. And also just having other people around, that can inspire you. So I know your parents, have had a major impact on your life as well as mine. We've been fortunate to be able to spend, or me anyway, almost 4 decades, in their family. But I'm curious if you had to go back and pull, like, wow, what is one of the greatest lessons that you think they taught you? If you boiled all that down, what would come to mind?
well, there's so many things. I was blessed to be raised in the home that I was raised in. I had Christian parents. But one thing that I think I won't ever forget this is I remember laying in my bed as a child, very young child, and hearing my mom and dad in their bedroom at night kneel beside their bed and pray. And, I can tell you, I don't know if you guys have ever seen the movie War Room, but that's kind of what I'm reminded of, that lady who had her prayer closet and she had names taped on the wall. Well, that was kind of the way my parents were and my mom. My mom was an intercessor. And there's so many people that's in the kingdom today because of her prayers. I mean, they prayed about everything. They didn't make a decision without praying about it. whether that was buying a car. I mean, it wasn't, or building a house, buying a car, whatever it was, that was their foundation. They prayed about everything. And so, and that just showed me it's not about what they told me, it's about what I seen them do. They just didn't talk it, but they walked it. And I think that had such a great impact on me, of just hearing them pray every night about everything. And, it goes back to when I said, I went to them and told them that I wanted to go to a Christian school. And at that point in time, my dad worked construction. And so he was off most of the winters. And so, they had to save all summer for the winter, to prepare for the winter financially. And so I knew that. So there's two things in here. They showed me how to pray and taught me how to pray, but also how to believe God. Because just like I said, they could have easily said, hey, we can't afford that. I don't even work in the winter, and we can't afford that. But man, what did they do? I remember them kneeling beside their bed and praying together that, this is our daughter's desire and we want to be able to do this for her. And it's so crazy that it was probably the first week of school, the best that I can recall, of my parents enrolling me in the school and having to pay this tuition. But I think it was like the first week or maybe the first month of school that I was there, somebody, don't still to this day truly know who it was, went down to the school and paid my tuition for the whole year. But I remember my parents praying about that. Like, how are we going to be able to afford this? And just show us, how we're going to be able to afford this, because this is her desire and we want to be able to do this for her. So they took the step of faith to send me there, even though they're like, how are we going to pay for this? So they took the step of faith. And then, like I said, somebody else came in and paid my tuition, for a whole year for me to go to that school. So there's a couple lessons that I can remember in my life, that they have taught me how to pray and how to trust and believe God, for everything.
Well, you said a whole lot there without diving too deep in that. That's pretty powerful. This one is kind of a fun question for me because I know it's something you're supposed to do. If you had to write a book tomorrow, what would you write about?
Wow. There's some tough questions. Like there's a couple different topics I probably would...
You probably have more than one book in you.
Feel like I would write about, but one of the things I'm big on is just be who you are. Don't try to be like everybody else. Just be the person that you were created to be, and do it well. So I think I would have to probably write it on that and kind of share a little bit of my testimony, and along those lines about, I would write a little bit about comparing ourselves. We can't we can't play the comparison game. We can't compare ourselves to everybody else, because we can see somebody who, was a great gardener and we think, well, we feel bad because, well, we don't like to garden. So we try to take up gardening and it's a major fail. So we have to be true to ourselves and be who we're created to be. And I think a lot of times, we feel like if we're not good at everything, then we just won't do anything, or, whatever the case may be. Like if you don't like to bake, then, I have a really good friend that's a baker. She does everything from scratch. I'm home, like half made, or, it's not always homemade. She does everything. Like, she has a pecan tree behind her house, she picks the pecans, put on top, all that stuff. But I can't compare myself to her. I'm not a baker. I don't desire to do that. So if I were to try that and to be like her, it would be a major fail, because I don't like that.
Yeah.
So just don't compare yourself with other people. Just be who you are.
I'd buy that book. That's pretty good. When you starting on that?
I don't know. I might have already started on it.
Some fun stuff as the audience just kind of gets to know you a little bit more, and then we'll jump into the stuff that we as men need to hear. Favorite part of your morning routine?
That's our coffee time. I look forward to that every morning. I know it's something, small, but, we have fun with it. And I'm not really a morning person. I was not a morning person. I mean, I wouldn't sleep until like 9 o'clock or anything, but 6:30, 7 o'clock, I would get up. But I look forward to our coffee time more and more. And now it's so weird because now I'm such a morning person. Like I'm up, usually 5 o'clock. But just creating a new habit, and getting into a new routine. But I really enjoy that time. And that's when you're at your best to have difficult conversations or just any conversations. And so I just made that a priority. If I had anything that I wanted to talk to you about or share, I knew I needed to do it early in the morning, because that's when you're the best, not at night when you come home and you've talked all day and you're out of words. So I just really made that a priority, and I really enjoy it. I mean, we have fun with it. And every holiday we get new coffee mugs, to celebrate Valentine's Day, Easter, and, we just have fun with it.
Yeah. I think one of the big messages in there, maybe we'll talk about it a little bit later, but that is such an example. In marriage, I think we approach it and we look at it from a world's perspective, and it's all about us. I can't tell you how many people that I've heard say, well, she just doesn't make me happy anymore, so I know God would want me happy, so I'm getting a divorce. And that's like the biggest pile of bull that I've ever heard. And it's not even the responsibility of the other person to make you happy. Somehow we missed what, marriage was really all about, which was serving another person. If you do that well, you're going to be happy. But that is such an example, I think, of you did something that wasn't natural to you, but you did it because you wanted to position yourself and adjust to how I was, which I am a very early morning person, and I do know that I'm much better, the best of me. It's the reason why we do an early morning podcast when we're doing this instead of at 10 o'clock at night. There'd be nobody listening to that, if I was doing that.
So I think that's why, like when you told me that, when I realized, hey, when you wanted to come home at night and I wanted to have a conversation and it didn't go the way that I thought it should go or wanted it to go, it's like, well, I'm better in the morning. So wives, listen to what your husband say. Set your alarms, get up, have the conversations in the morning.
You're welcome, man. But yes, that's a great example of just, ingesting. So unwinding at the end of the day, maybe there's some lessons in here for us on that, but how do you like to unwind at the end of the day?
Well, I guess it would be taking baths, soaking. That's just how I unwind. At the end of the day, I look forward to that every evening. It's like, you can go in there and be by myself and just kind of use that time to reflect on the day. Like, what would I have changed about today? How can I do it differently tomorrow? How can I add value to somebody tomorrow? Or how did I screw up today? How do I learn from that? And so just reflect on the day of what happened. And I just love that. That's how I unwind. It's just very relaxing, and listen to some relaxing music, worship music, encouraging music, and that just helps me unwind.
It's good. Favorite magical moment? What would stick out? One you never forget? I know there could be more than one, but
I would have to say on that one, of course, when you proposed to me, asked me to be your wife. That was like magical. It's like, you have these magical moments in your life, just like I was talking about earlier, meeting you in the 6th grade. I didn't even know your name, but I can remember every detail about that day. It's kind of like that day, like, when you asked me to be your wife, and I can tell you everything about that day. It was magical. That's what I always dreamed of being a wife. And so that's what I would have to say on that one.
Well, and it was probably the highlight of grade school, wasn't it? Wasn't quite that young, but it was pretty young. And needless to say, both of our parents were shocked. So,
but I think, that's a lot to be said. It's going to be 38 years in August. And, I know my parents was just kind of looking like, what is up with this? And, really trying to discourage us. And like, we're pretty sure this is not going to work out. So here we are, we've been together 40 years, but married 38. So here we are.
Yeah. Which would have been a logical assumption, but
I mean, I can't imagine if my kids would have come to me and say, or hey, I'm gonna get married, and I can only imagine what my parents felt.
But there's something about that too that I think one of the things early on that we did that I think really kind of set the marker is that we both agreed early on, because we had both come from homes where we had experienced the pain of divorce. And, we had made up our minds that was just never a path that we were going to go down. And so I think what we said is it's not an option. And it sure doesn't mean that there wasn't times that, man, this is too hard and what you did was too dumb, or I don't know if I want to keep doing this. I don't know if you're going to change. All the different things you just go through in marriage that we went through in marriage ourselves, but that never really was an option. And I think that forces you to work through things. In other words, and I'm not saying that there's not a time for that. There's even a biblical grounds, at times to do that. But I think we flippantly play off of our emotions, and it's like, because you're not making me happy, or I think she could make me happier, or he could make me happier, we use that as an excuse, and we just kind of take the easy way out, and we don't consider all the ramifications. And I think if you can remove that thought process in your option, instead of focusing, it's almost like in sales, if you present somebody with too many options, they're going to have to think about it for a long time because it can become confusing. But if you pick the best option for them, and that's the only one you present, they can decide whether that's good for them or it's not good for them. And I think it's that way if we take that mindset towards our marriages, like giving up, quitting, walking out when it gets hard, not an option. So all the focus then becomes on, well, how do I fix me?
Which I think, too, I'll interject something there. It's like I remember the quote that tough times don't last. No matter what you go through, it can be really hard. I mean, I know we've been through some very difficult times that sometimes I'm like, are we going to make it? And even though we were in tune with that, and I feel like we took our marriage vows very seriously. But it still was like there were times that you second guess that, and that's normal, but, and I'm a testimony to say that tough times don't last. When you're going through tough times, you think this is never going to end. I promise you it does end. It gets better. But, tough people last, and they stick it out. And so I would encourage you to even keep your marriage vows in front of you on your mirror when you're getting ready, and take them seriously.
Yeah.
And ask every morning, how can I add value to my spouse or my kids? Or, but, just don't do things flippantly, but, put those before you where you can remember, hey, for better or worse, sickness and in health. And remember those vows, it's a covenant that you made. And, I think on even social media is great, but sometimes, you hear of all these people. I'm just like bumfuzzled. Like, I don't even know, how do you have 15 soulmates in your life? Like, it's every time you look on social media, I got a new soulmate. This person's got a new soulmate. Like, I can't even fathom that. So we trade each other in like cars. They get too many miles on them. We're going to trade you in. So I just really encourage you to take your marriage vows seriously.
Well, let's dive a little deeper just on how to help us as guys. So it's been said that, men are idiots, and I may have been accused of being their king. So I think I'm appropriate to kind of ask some of these questions. So on behalf of all,
that was on him.
Let's dive deep into just relationship expertise. I think sometimes we become an expert in things because of all the things we've done wrong. So we can tell people like, well, I can tell you the 7 things you shouldn't do. It's not necessarily because we got it right, but we just, you have life experience. And after 4 decades, you have a little bit of life experience in the area of relationships. So what do you think the number one need is of a man going into marriage?
Well, I would say definitely respect. I mean, we think as women sometimes it's sex, but it really is respect.
And what's the number one need of a woman in marriage?
To feel loved.
So think about that, guys. That's 2 different spectrums. And the answers that she gave are proven out statistically. I mean, there's books been written on them. There's courses out there. It's true. If you boil it all down, and the inside, a man wants to know, and the thing he needs the most is that I'm being respected. And whose opinion does he care more about? Well, the person he chose to spend the rest of his life with. And then for the woman, it's not as much about respect. And it's not that you don't respect her, but she needs to know that she's loved. And I think, man, as a guy, you think about love, and there's all kinds of things that pop in our mind. And I guarantee you most of them are totally different than what that word actually looks like and means when a woman is saying that. And so for us to understand that, I think is huge. I read this study as I was preparing for this, thought this was interesting. Dr. James Dobson had done a survey with men and women, and he asked him, he said, if you had 2 choices, he said, which would you be willing to live without? And so in your marriage, and he asked men, and then he asked the women. And all the men said, well, if I had to choose, I'd be willing to live in a marriage without love. And all the women said, well, if I had to choose, to be in a marriage, I would live in it without respect. So it proves out exactly what we talk about. It's not that you want to be in those situations, because if I had to choose, one thing, this is the one thing I could do without. Why? Because there was something else that was more important. And man, those are so polar opposites, which I think is why we struggle as dudes so much, because, we approach everything in our marriage like we approach a guy at work or a challenge or a problem at work. And it's like, man, that really works at work. And like, I don't work here. What's up with that? And I think this is just another picture of.
Yeah, well, especially I think
that
in that, if your husband is a CEO of a company, or he's a boss, or he owns a company, and he has a lot of people that, he is over, well, when he comes home, he's got to change hats when he walks in the door, because it doesn't work for you to come home and try to approach us like you would a team member or one of your employees, or, you have to approach us in a totally different way.
Care to elaborate? No, please don't. Let's move on. So I do want you to tell the guys today, I may or may not have been accused of being a dictator in the past, so I'm not really sure. Tell us today what do wives wish their husbands knew?
I think one big thing is communication, and, how you communicate with us. And just like I said, when you come, through the door, you have to change hats. And I think that women tend to be more on the emotional side, and they want to connect with their husbands, emotionally, not just physically, but emotionally. And so, I've always said that, what sex means to a man is what communication is, to a woman. So the man can think about how important that is, that I probably need to start communicating better with my wife, because that's how strong it builds that emotional connection between the two of you.
That sounds painful when I hear communication and emotions and then connecting that. So,
but I think communication and emotions are tied, it's kind of one and the same.
Well, I think that's the revelation for me when I hear you talk about that, or probably a bunch of the guys. So without just hanging out there, because we could for the rest of the podcast, bring a little bit more insight to that. They're so closely tied together. What does that look like just in a day-to-day marriage?
Well, I mean, it's like when you talk about having, especially as your spouse, one of my pet peeves is I don't like superficial stuff all the time. Like if I want to get to know somebody on a deeper level, like it's got to go beyond how was your day? It was fine. Well, yada, yada, yada. We need to connect on a deeper at the end. And there's also different levels of communication. So how you would communicate with just somebody you met on the street needs to be totally different than how you would communicate with your spouse. So I think just getting from moving, down the different levels of communication is so important. I mean, you don't obviously start out, most people don't obviously start out at the last level of communication. You know what I mean? It takes time to get to know each other and to, for that person to tear down walls that they've built, maybe from their past, their childhood, or whatever happened. They have a lot of walls up, so they're not just going to be open and just to spill everything. So you have to be okay with that. But there is different levels of communication.
So how does a wife feel if a husband approaches her from level one, the most shallow communication, and that's all that is like, how was your day?
You get very frustrated.
What'd you do?
Like, this has got to go beyond this. Like, I need something else, beyond just the superficial relationship.
Why do you think that's so important to you as women? Because for dudes, it's like, good. How was everything? It's great.
Yeah, I just think that we're just more in tune to our emotions than men. I know that's not the stereotype, men, because there is some men that are more emotional.
Oh, I'm thinking of one right now. I'm holding back not to use his name. But
So I think we just have to, we have to be mindful of that. But we also, as wives, we have to be a safe place for our husbands to open up and to share things, something that maybe that we didn't know that he's never shared with us that happened in his past, or he has to know that it's a safe place, that we're not going to get together with our girlfriends over a cup of coffee and we're going to just talk about all of his things, all the things that he's going through, because that's the level also of disrespect too, for your husband to open up and share with you, and then you blab all of that to your friends, or I don't care if it's your best friend. Some things just don't need to be, it just needs to be kept between you and your spouse. And he's got to feel too that it's a safe environment, it's a safe place.
Yeah, I think the street runs both ways too. I mean, obviously,
Sure.
I think we as men need to understand the same thing, because the moment your wife goes to share something that's important to her and you laugh it off or act like it's trivial or maybe even make fun of her on some level, that door will close really, really quick. Anyway, so what else? What else do we as men need to know? What not to say, what you wish we knew, all the good stuff.
One, these aren't in any order, but I think one big thing is what you did to get her is what you need to do to keep her. Is very important. And I would say that's probably at the top of the list for most women. I think a lot of times men feel like, well, I gotcha, so that's what I was after. So I don't really have to continue to do those things. I don't have to take you to dinner, buy you flowers, open the car door, things like that.
Conquered, check the box, move on.
Right. And just kind of close that window, I'm done, But we need those things continually.
And talk to us why that's so important from a female perspective. But I think there's a level of respect, obviously, there. Some of those things you mentioned that you want to continue to do. But from a female's perspective, why is that so important?
Well, I feel like those are just ways that you show us that you love us, and that's our number one need, is to feel loved. So with you bringing home flowers or taking us on date night, those are just ways that we feel loved. And again, it doesn't have to be some major $150 dinner. It could be dinner at home. If your husband likes to cook, he can cook you dinner, watch a movie. It doesn't have to be anything extravagant. It's the small things actually that mean the most a lot of times.
So one of my friends has a famous quote that will live forever, and he was telling me one time, and I know he doesn't care if I share this, I just want to share his name. He said, I don't understand, with my wife, she's wanting me to tell her that I love her all the time. He said, finally I just told her, he said, listen, I told you I loved you the day we got married. If I change my mind, I'll let you know. I think that embodies how most guys think. It's like, I haven't told you anything different. I'm still here. I'm going to work every day. I'm providing for this because we are so totally on a different line of communication and thinking and thought process. And especially, if you have guys that maybe were raised with nothing but brothers, or maybe the mom was missing and, they were raised by, just their dad, or, all those circumstances and situations do have an impact on how we think. But you're saying the one time is not good enough, and
Right.
just what we're doing every day to provide, there's a different language
Right.
that you
And I
guys are
think,
wanting to see and hear.
Yes, and I think it's the small things, like maybe text your wife during the day and say, hey, thinking about you, just wanted to let you know I love you. And, that means a lot to me, because when you do that, I'm like, I know how busy your schedule is and, all the meetings that you have on a daily basis. But wow, you took a couple minutes to text me and to let me know you were thinking about me. That's all I needed for the day. Sometimes that just makes my day. So it's not about some big extravagant vacation or, a dinner. It's those small things like that, just to let them know that you're thinking about them and that you care.
It's almost like a constant reminder. We talked a little bit about this a while ago, but how important do you think it is to continually invest in your marriage on an ongoing basis? Because so many people don't.
Right. Until there's a crisis. I remember after we got married, I was still very young, but I was always had a draw to marriage and improving my marriage, being a better wife. That every time, that's kind of all the books that I would look at, was on marriage and how to improve. And so I think it's very important to invest you have to invest in your marriage. I mean, it's very important. I mean, you have to put your marriage above your kids. I mean, sometimes that's not very popular, but your spouse comes before your kids. And I think that getting away, whether that is quarterly or a couple times a year, and investing and going to a conference or a seminar and just getting together for a couple nights. And I think it's very important.
There's a big topic there, maybe one we can try to tackle at some other point on a podcast, but that is so true. And if you think, and it's not that you don't love your kids, and it's not that you don't lay your life down for, because you do, but you made a commitment to their mother or their father long before they were brought into the earth, and that was your first commitment. And hopefully after they're gone and you take on a role of a grandparent, they're not in your house anymore, and you don't want to be living with someone in the empty nest season of your life that you don't even know, that you feel like you don't have anything in common with. And I think if we're not careful in the busy world that we live in, our kids can fill our calendars where there is nothing left to give to invest in our marriage. We've become nothing more than, taxi drivers and logistic managers for schedules of our kids, all of which have some degree of value. You can be involved in all kinds of athletics and dance and, gymnastics. And I'm just thinking through all the things like our grandkids or maybe we were involved in. And there's certain value that you can extract from that. You can learn character, you can learn sportsmanship, you can learn teamwork. But at the end of the day, the majority of the kids that are, the majority of the parents on here that have kids, your kids probably are not going to do that professionally. Yet, be careful not to take 2 decades of your life and fill all of your life with things that you don't now have time to do things that they would benefit from, that they will use and they will do for the rest of their life. Like giving them a role model of, dating their mother. Giving them a role model of being able to have time to go on a vacation. Here's a good one. Give them a role model of the importance of faith in your life. I'm so busy because we work so hard and run so fast that I have to take Sunday and go do something else. And I never set the example of taking them, to a place of worship where I can learn how to serve. It's great to be able to listen to things just like this podcast and be able to be fed for them and inspired by them. But in no way does that take place of a local church, because we're not to be a consumer. We're to go, and be a participator and to be able to give back. And I can't serve, I can't build relationships, I can't do all those things if I'm simply watching that and having that experience from my phone. So I think you're spot on.
But I think, even investing through all the different seasons and stages of our marriage, it's when you first get married, it's just the two of you. You still need to invest. And then when you have kids, you need to invest. And then it's just all the way down till now. Like, we've been married 38 years. And you think, oh, well, we've got this thing. But no, we still have to invest and still improve ourselves and get better. Yeah.
Kind of to follow all that up that we just talked about, but any advice or tips that you would give for a man that's struggling to really try to find a healthy work-life balance? I mean, it consumes a huge portion of our lives as men, and obviously we also feel a huge responsibility for our spouses, our kids, our home. I mean, some families have dual incomes, some only have a single income. Irregardless, there's this huge sense of responsibility for the prom that's coming up, for the wedding that's impending, the college, that's, out there 10 years from now or whatever the case might be. And I think it's just always a struggle for us. How can I be successful enough at what I do, fulfill my purpose, and be paid well for that so there's security at home, but yet not to trade that for not having any kind of relationship or being a totally absent husband or father. Any tips at all that would help us navigate that?
Well, we've discussed this, quite often about the work-life balance, and that's what it is. It's a juggling. It's a balancing act. Like, you go to work for 8 hours, at least. So you're not going to, in turn, be able to spend 8 hours with your family every day. But I've always said that it's not about the quantity of time. It's about the quality of time. So even if you invest 30 minutes an evening, with your kids, whether that's getting on the floor and playing with them, putting your cell phone away for 30 minutes and not answering it. So it's just being intentional about creating quality time with your spouse and your kids.
Any advice for, let's just say someone starting, let's just keep it on the husbands, with someone that's starting out as a husband or just maybe even a new father? What kind of advice would you give them?
I think as a new husband, I would have to say it goes back again to like the premarital counseling, like before you get married, how important that is to invest when you're starting out as a husband, is to know your spouse, know their love languages, why they do the things they do. I think that's very important. Like, I wish that's one of the things I wish I would have known more about at a younger age, was just love languages, what makes you tick, what you like, your dislikes. Because a lot of times we tend to give out of our own love language, not,
so
the other person's love language. So I think it's very important as a husband to understand that with your wife, but then to carry that on as well to your kids, and knowing their love language, what works, what doesn't, how you discipline them, because our kids are all different. They all have different personalities. And so just being mindful of that. And another thing is, time goes by so fast. And I always heard my grandparents say that, time flies, and when you're young, it's like you really don't think about that. But when you become grandparents, I think you realize that more. Time really does fly, and you just have such a short time to impact their lives. And so I would just say, slow down, enjoy these moments. Life it's not going to be perfect. It doesn't have to be perfect, but just create a fun environment for your kids and enjoy those little things. Because when the day is over, you're never going to get that time back. If your son comes to you and says, hey, will you play cards on the floor? Oh no, I've got to do this, or you're on your phone or whatever. Just think about that. You're never going to get that time back. Like, he asked you to play, and one of these days you're going to think when he's 18 years old, wow, I wish I had that to do over. I wish he would ask me to do something, go fishing or whatever. So just take time to, and slow down, enjoy those little moments in your life.
So do you think going to an event like the Man Adventure Camp, so you obviously know a lot about it, would be beneficial for the entire family? Obviously, I know it's beneficial
absolutely.
for a man.
Yeah.
And why? So if the husband was leaving, there's a whole lot of things he probably could do at home, probably a honey-do list that he's not got to yet,
Right.
and he's busy. How would that benefit the rest of the family?
Well, I think too, just being, and I think if you're, a wife out there and you're listening, I would go right now and order your husband a ticket for Man Up.
That happened last year. I heard stories of that.
Father's Day is coming up. This would be a great Father's Day gift, but it's not only going to benefit him, but it is going to impact your entire family. I feel like men tend to isolate themselves. And, they might be struggling with something in their life, addiction, whatever. So they tend to isolate themselves more, I think, than women do. So I would just really encourage you to get the ticket and come, because then you're going to be around a lot of guys. Not that you have to open up and share if you're not comfortable, but just sitting around a fire. And another thing, we would never want to pressure you into sharing something you're not comfortable with sharing. But just come, sit around the fire, and really hear other men's testimonies and stories and things that they struggle with in their marriage or in parenting or addictions. And then you realize that, hey, I'm not the only one. There's not something wrong with me. I'm not a bad person. But you see that all these other people struggle with the same issues, because there's nobody on the face of the earth that doesn't struggle with something. And so I think just being in that environment, really understanding that, and create a brotherhood of people that, hey, afterwards even connect and make long-term friendships from this event, that, hey, I'm really struggling in this area. Can you coach me, talk me through, pray with me? So it's just the camaraderie and the brotherhood that you will, and connecting with other men that are like-minded and that struggle with the same issues.
Yeah, it's good. Yeah, the benefits, I think, are really endless. I probably will kick myself for asking this question, but flip the script for a minute. Is there one question you'd like to ask me?
Oh, I have lots of questions. I think
I
I've been
said
really
one.
good about not asking you any questions, and you've been firing them out at me left and right.
Uno.
One question I would ask you is, what is the most rewarding thing about being a husband? And you never let me answer that one. You just skipped right over that one when you asked me.
Really, I think for me, probably the most rewarding thing is that I truly am married to my best friend. And so being able to share all of those special moments in life with your best friend, some people have to leave their marriage to go get a best friend. Not leave it, but you know what I mean? Outside of that, that's their best friend. And so they're not there for all those moments. But I think in my case, we are. It's not just the moments of our kids being married or grandkids being born or our kids being born, but it's even all the little things.
Right. I think it's just, for me too, like one of the most rewarding things about being a wife is, I didn't answer that a while ago, is just that you do life with your best friend and you grow old together. But one thing I would say to that is, you live with this person, we've been married 38 years, and still, like, each other better than anybody else in your life. You know your flaws and your temperaments and all that, but yet you still continue to love each other unconditionally. So I think that's one of the most rewarding things, that even though I have all these hang-ups, but you still love me unconditionally. I think that's very rewarding.
If we wanted to have a comparison where I have much more hang-ups than you do. So anyway, that's probably a great place to end this thing today. I think we'll probably do this again. As I listen to this, there's several different big topics I think that we could probably go in a lot more depth with that would help all of us as guys that are listening. But thanks for joining me today. This has been a lot of fun.
It's been fun. It's been an honor to be here.
I think it's helpful for all the men, hopefully, that's been listening. At the end of the day, we all want to be great husbands. We all want to be great men. We want to be great fathers. And I think sometimes we can feel like rock stars in those departments, but most of the time we probably feel like utterly we failed in that. And this show is about offering hope and encouragement that, hey, we're not perfect and we're never going to get it completely right all the time. That's not an excuse not to try and get better and improve. And hopefully there's been some pointers today that can actually help us do that. So remember, guys, the legacy is not what you leave to people as much as it is what you leave in people. Go out this week, leave a mark that can't be erased, and we'll see you next time on the Man Up Podcast. Hey, Terry Gwaltney here from the Man Up Podcast. Listen, I just want to tell you how much we appreciate you supporting the podcast, listening to it. We hope it's adding a ton of value to your life. Also want to ask you to do us a favor. If you could like and share this podcast on wherever you consume your social media content, whether that be YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, we would appreciate it. It just helps us get the word out so we can help more people. And maybe you've never experienced the Man Up Adventure Camp that we do in October. You can check out our Facebook or our website, manup-camp.com. Once again, I want to thank you for listening to the Man Up Podcast, and we'll see you soon.